Your body is a temple created by God. So today on Back to the Bible, Pastor Nat Crawford shares the need to be physically fit and emphasizes the freedom and power Christ gives you to do so. Later, he'll discuss the practicalities of faith and fitness in his discussion with Arnie Cole. We'll begin in just a moment. But first, let me remind you to call and request your copy of Win the Day. This month's issue is our gift to thank you for your financial support of this program. Win the Day will help you discover how to grow spiritually and live a life of purpose on purpose. So request your copy today at 1-800-759-2425, 1-800-759-2425, or visit us at backtothebible.org. Now let's go to Pastor Nat.
It was January of 1999. I remember getting up one morning and thinking, this is going to stink. I mean, how could it not? I had always had this problem. For as long as I can remember, I had struggled with it. But 1999, that was going to be different. Or would it? I had expressed the same resolution each and every year. I'd start out really good. I'd try the latest fad solution. I thought to myself, there has to be a silver bullet, a quick solution to achieving my goal. But like many of you, I would start strong, running hard, motivated by guilt and the fear of failure. But then I'd trip up and begin to slide backward, only to end up where I had started before, if not further behind. Not this year, I said. So I stepped on the scale. Wow. It was a new record. I weighed 242 pounds. I was alarmed. But honestly, I wasn't shocked at this new high. So I walked back to my bedroom. I put on my size 42 jeans, which were honestly a bit snugger than before. And I remember it was in that moment I said, enough is enough. It's enough. 1999 is the year where I will finally do it. I will get physically fit. And that is exactly what I did. You see, in 1999, I went from being 242 pounds and wearing a size 42 jeans down to 148 pounds and down to a size 32 jeans. Now, if you've ever seen me preach or watch some of the videos from Back to the Bible, you're thinking to yourself, no way, Nat. That's not possible. You could have never been that big. I mean, look at you. You're kind of the skinny, dorky looking guy. That just can't be true. Well, it is true. It is true. But I know the second thing you're thinking, because the second question always is how. How on earth did you lose over 85 pounds in a year? Well, this is the question we all ask someone when they make a serious life change. How? But I'll be honest, I don't think it's the most important question we can ask. Now, in time, I agree, how becomes an essential question. How becomes the roadmap on how we accomplish the goal. The real question that we need to ask is why? Why did I change? What changed in me to make this even possible? I believe that why is the single biggest question we all need to answer to accomplish any goal. Now, today, you may not be where I was in 1999, when I needed to lose a bunch of weight, but I can guarantee that each one of us today should have the goal of becoming physically fit. And by physically fit, I mean to be in control of what you do to your body and what you do with it. Every one of us has some kind of physical struggle. I think if we're honest, we struggle to become physically fit because we are a slave. We are a slave to something outside of ourselves. You can become a slave to food, to alcohol, to sex, pornography, smoking, working out, TV, your smartphone, you fill in the blank. We can become a slave to one thing or many things. You can read 50 articles, You can attend 10 seminars on how to overcome that addiction or that idol or being a slave. But until you understand why you need to overcome it, you will never get there. You will never become physically fit. So you need to have a why. And there are no greater or more powerful whys than the ones that come from the Bible. Every person can become physically fit when they believe and act upon 5 biblical whys, and that's what we're going to talk about today and tomorrow. So let's turn to God's Word now, and we're going to spend our time in 1 Corinthians chapter 6. We'll start in verse 12. Now, before we get into the text, let me just say a couple things about this letter to the Corinthian church. The person writing this letter is the Apostle Paul. Paul wrote this letter to identify problems in the church. He wanted to offer some godly solutions and tell them how to live in a society that was far from God. The city of Corinth was a well-to-do, multicultural city. It had a stadium that could hold up to 18,000 people for sporting events. It's hard to believe that they had something like that back then, but they were big sporting fans. Corinth had a theater for 3,000 people where they could listen to music and watch plays. It even had a large farmer's market. Corinth was also a hub for religious pluralism. You see, you could go to Corinth and find gods of all shapes and all sizes. At one time, it had a temple of Aphrodite that housed 1,000 temple prostitutes. Corinth, it was a happening city, but it was full of moral decay. So Paul, he needed to offer some advice to his Corinthian brothers and sisters. So let's see what Paul had to say beginning in verse 12. Paul writes, "All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by anything." Paul says, all things are lawful, or maybe your version says permissible. You see, this was a Corinthian slogan. It was kind of a anything goes way of living. The ancient world wasn't honestly any different than ours is today. We today say something like, you do your thing, and I'll do mine, and there is no judgment. But what does Paul say to this? He says, yes, you're right, all things are lawful. All things are allowed, but are they helpful? I really like what the NASB says, because it says, but are all things profitable? Are they profitable? Are they to my advantage? In other words, is it beneficial? Is it profitable? Now, as some of you know, I'm a certified executive coach, and one of the elements of being a coach is assessing where a client is and where they want to go. What is it that they hope to achieve? In this coaching process, I ask them a powerful question. And the question is this: will what I am about to do move me closer to my goal or move me farther away? You see, I ask my clients this question because it helps them identify whether their decision is beneficial or whether it's detrimental. I think we would all do well to ask this question before we say something or before we do something. Is what I'm about to say or do, is it going to move me closer to my goal or take me farther away? For me, it was asking the question, is eating this double cheeseburger going to bring me closer or move me further away from my goal of becoming physically fit? Some people would say, is by going to this exercise class going to move me closer to my goal or further away? Or watching TV or going to read a book, what's going to move me closer to my goal? But clearly, it goes much further than our goals of being just physically fit, getting our bodies lean and trim. Paul says all things are permissible, even sin. As a Christian, you are forgiven for every sin you commit, and that's true. But sin, no matter how small or pleasurable, it is not profitable. Yes, as a Christian, you are free to do whatever you want to do, but for heaven's sake, why would you? Not everything is to your advantage. It is not profitable. Paul then uses the slogan again, all things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by anything. You and I as believers, all things are within our power to do, but we don't need to be overpowered by anything. Do you know why? It's because you are free. You are free, and that's the first why. You and I are free in Christ. Let's discuss this for a bit with Arnie Cole. Kara, who's usually here, she's out of town with her family. So Arnie, do you mind sharing on a personal and practical level how you evaluate your actions according to, does this move me closer or further away from my goal? And how does that work for you?
Boy, that's a great question. And this is a great series on being physically fit. Nat, I could never imagine you weighing 244 pounds when I see you weighing 110 pounds now. It's just pretty amazing. But, goals are tricky things. Oftentimes, you set them on New Year's Eve, and then you mess up January 3rd, 4th, and then it's forgotten. A lot of people struggle with goals. So for me, I've tried to make it as simple as I possibly could, and that is to have just one goal, and that goal is to move closer to Jesus today than I was yesterday. And that may sound simple, but if you really focus on just that, it's one of the hardest things you'll ever do. And oftentimes you kind of fall short, but it's easy to remember, and it's really all that matters in life.
Well, and it's a great way to actually use this question in our walk with God. Is about what I'm about to watch, to listen to do going to bring me closer to Jesus today than it did yesterday? And what a great question to use, especially with reading the Bible. And we know the answer is going to be yes, absolutely. So we would encourage you to use this question in your walk with Jesus today.
Summer is definitely here, so how will you make the most of it? Why not use this time to grow spiritually? That's the emphasis of this month's issue of Win the Day with Pastor Nat Crawford.
Hey, Pastor Nat here. You know, our research shows that most Christians really want to grow spiritually, but they don't know where to start. So in this month's issue of Win the Day, I've written some devotions to help you focus on growing in the grace and knowledge of God's Word. I can't think of a better way to make the most of your time.
Today, we'd like to send you a copy of Win the Day as a thank you for your gift to Back to the Bible. Make your request at 1-800-759-2425 and learn how to win the day today. Again, that's 1-800-759-2425. Or if you prefer to give online, visit backtothebible.org. That's backtothebible.org. Now, let's return to our message with Pastor Nat.
As a child of God, you don't need to be a slave to sin, an addiction, an idol, or anything else. Why? Because Christ has freed you from that bondage. Paul writes in Romans 6:14, "For sin shall not be master over you, for you are not under law, but under grace." I believe it was Ravi Zacharias who said, "Sin is meeting a legitimate need in an illegitimate way." I think Ravi is exactly right. So let's think about some common issues today, and I promise you, by discussing these or bringing these up, I'm not trying to make you feel bad or anyone else feel bad, but I think these are very real expressions of our struggle with sin today. Think about obesity. It's an abuse of something that is a legitimate need. Abusing food meant for enjoyment and nutrition, that's what it is. Now, I'm not negating or saying that there aren't medical conditions that attribute to this. I believe there are. Doctors would confirm this. But I think we can always do more to control our intake and our output, like going to exercise classes by going to the gym and managing what we consume in our bodies. But again, it's meeting a legitimate need, nutrition, and meeting it in an illegitimate way. Think about pornography. Think about sexual activity outside of marriage. It is the abuse of something that is natural, that is so beautiful. Sex is intended for a man and a woman who are married to each other. God created humankind for intimacy. But unfortunately, we try to meet a legitimate need in an illegitimate way. Think about sex. Couples today have this mentality of you got to try it before you buy it. And unfortunately, I see this both in non-believers and believers. You see, in counseling sessions, people will say, sure, maybe the Bible promotes sex in a monogamous marriage relationship between one man and one woman, but I can do what I want. It's my body, it is my choice. Unfortunately, those who choose to reject God's design for sex, they will experience heartache, physical consequences, emotional and spiritual pain, and so much more. Think about success. As human beings created in the image of God, we lose sight of our inherent value and our worth. So what do? We begin to seek value and credibility by becoming workaholics at the sake of our families, at the sake of our friends, at the sake of our lives. So we begin to seek value and credibility by becoming workaholics at the sake of our families. At the cost of insurmountable debt, we accumulate the most amount of stuff. We think by having the most amount of friends on Facebook or retweets on Twitter that really means something, but the reality is we are forsaking real friendship, real relationships. Here's a big one right now, smartphones. It makes me angry to go to the park with my kids, not because I don't want to play with my kids. It's because almost every parent is glued to their phones. Their kids are off playing. They're getting hurt. They want some attention. They say, Mommy, Daddy, watch me, play with me. But what do their parents do? They ignore their kids and they feed their addiction to their phones. They are glued to their phones. Look, and it's not just parents. I go to restaurants, coffee shops, even driving in the car. People are driving in their car, putting on makeup with one hand, and then surfing Facebook with the other. I have seen it even on the interstate. It's insane. People are addicted. They are slaves. They are mastered by their phones. It is crazy. Now, I'm going to stop there, but you know the list could go on. Look, even working out and even dieting could be a thing people are slaves to. The very best of things people can be addicted to, and they can be slaves. I'm all about looking our best for the glory of God. I think God has given us a temple and we needed to take care of it. But if you're spending all your time and treasure focused on how you look, you're probably a slave. Look, regardless of what your struggle is, God, He still loves you. Now, nothing is going to change that. But we also need to remember He wants the very best for us. And I believe today we are out of shape. But Paul says you don't have to be. He says you are free. Christ has freed you. It doesn't matter what influenced you to the slavery and dependence. You do not need to be dominated by anything. We should become physically fit. Why? Because we are free. Paul, he gives us another why in the next two verses, beginning in verse 13. Paul writes, "Food is meant for the stomach, and stomach for the food, and God will destroy both one and the other. The body is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. And God raised the Lord and will also raise us up by His power." It seems the Corinthians were validating their sexual immorality by saying food is for your tummy and your tummy is meant for food. Likewise, sex is for the body and the body is for sex. Now, Paul doesn't disagree with the first premise, but Paul needs to correct the second. The body is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord. And God raised the Lord and will also raise us up by His power. Our bodies are not just created by God for the here and now. No, they will be alive and fully functional in the eternal future. Why should we strive to be physically fit? Why should we desire to master our bodies? It's because you belong to God. We belong to God. Our bodies are for the Lord. That's the second why. Our bodies are on loan from God. He created them. We were knit in our mother's womb, and we are fearfully and wonderfully made. The notion of we should do whatever, whenever, and however with our bodies because we'll get a new glorified body in the resurrection, that viewpoint is wrong. Yes, it's true. We can do what we like. We can do whatever we want to. We are free. But like Paul said, is it profitable? Is it beneficial? If we abuse our bodies here on this earth, will it forfeit that glorified body? No, God, He is gracious. Yes, we will get a new glorified body. But because He is loving, there are consequences here and now for abusing our bodies. Remember, our bodies belong to God. Now, is the Bible self-contradictory when we are both free and when we belong to God? How can we be both free and, as Paul says in Philippians 1:1, a slave to God? Well, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7:22, "For he who is called in the Lord as a bondservant is a freedman of the Lord." Okay, how can this be? Isn't he contradicting himself? Well, think of it like this. Think of it like a boat in a lake. We recently inherited a fishing boat. It's not a very big boat, but it will work well to take us where we want to fish. But think about the freedom a boat has in a lake. It doesn't matter how big or how small the boat is. It doesn't matter if it's a big lake or a small lake. The boat has great freedom in a lake. However, what happens if I decide to take that boat on the shore or I keep trying to drive it on land? You know I'm going to look like an idiot, and of course, I'm stuck. Why would it be stuck? Because the boat was made for water and not for land. It was made to glide on the surface of the water. In the water, the boat is free. But once it goes on land, it's stuck. It is useless. The same is true for us as children of God. God lovingly saves us and places us in a new path that is designed to make us flourish and to bring Him glory. So this is how we are free while serving our King. God lovingly gives us boundaries in which we can play for our benefit. It's not to harm us. It's not to purely restrict us from having fun. No, God has our very best in mind. What is going to make us grow, what is going to make us flourish, and what is also going to bring Him glory. So He gives us a very big lake to play in. So the first two whys of getting physically fit is we are free, and second, we belong to God. Let me now go to Arnie Cole. Arnie, you are a dynamic leader in our ministry. So how has freedom in God empowered you to set goals and even change course?
Well, even though for most of my life I wasn't a Christ follower, my parents were, and they worked with the Donnie people, who were the last known headhunters and cannibals in the world, and Indonesia. There's a book even written about called Peace Child. But anyways, I used to ask my mom, how can you do this crazy stuff at your age? You and Dad can't defend yourself. And she taught me, even as a non-believer, she says there's no safer place than doing the will of God. So, in other words, this freedom that God empowers you is you're doing the will of God. What else if there's no safer place? Now, the flip side of that is if you're misbehaving and you're not doing God's will, you might want to think, and I don't think I'd tell kids this, but really, maybe there's no more dangerous place than not following God's will. I don't know. It's something to think about, at least for a guilt trip or so.
Right? Absolutely. Well, I think that's a really good perspective. There is great freedom within living in God's will. And if we look at it, there's really a lot of boundary to play in. We are quite free. And you're exactly right. When we do step out of God's will, it ultimately does derail us, and there's very little pleasure there once we are caught in our sin. Well, speaking of sin, there's an area that I think a lot of people are struggling with today, and that's the area of porn. Porn has become an epidemic in our culture, with Christians as well as non-believers. So talk about how insidious porn really is and how it breaks down a person's ability to even function.
Yeah, they say that it rewires the brain and it causes tremendous problems. It's like doing cocaine or doing a drug, and you do it long enough and it becomes less and less effective, and therefore it becomes more and more addictive. And yes, we do see that it permeates the church with the male population especially. And all it does is destroys the individual. And it's not all, but, a lot of these guys think, well, it doesn't really hurt anybody. Nobody really sees what I'm doing. But in the long run, it destroys the very person that thinks nobody else is seeing it. So yes, it is a critical problem that the church has faced today.
It affects the individual, and it also affects the family and can affect every area of life. But I think people who are listening today, they want to know, is there hope? Because it is almost an epidemic today. And people are looking around going, okay, but how do I get out of it? So is there hope even for porn addiction?
Oh, yeah. And, the guys that I've worked with, especially pastors, they get themselves in a corner. And oftentimes I would hear, if I told my elders, they'd fire me. If I told my wife, she'd divorce me. So they've actually backed themselves into a corner, and they've compartmentalized their life. So porn just fits in neatly with sermon preparation and all those other things. And it's very, very tough and very difficult. But, over years and years of talking with men, the one thing I kind of observed is these guys talk about getting out of it, but like on a weekend retreat and stuff like that, towards the end of the time, you would see their interest is less and less involved. And really, most of the time it comes down to the guys getting caught, they feel ripped off, and they're trying to get back with their wives. The best way, though, is to do it on your own and take it one day, 1 minute at a time, and just work your way through it.
Yeah, I think that you're exactly right. What you said about the pastors today, as a former pastor of a church, I saw that where people would struggle with things, but they were afraid to talk about it. And I remember there was a pastor of a church, I think on the East Coast, and he actually came before the congregation. Now, he went to his elders first, but he went to the congregation on a Sunday and said, I messed up this week. And he goes, look, I was on the internet, I was searching for something, and I came across porn, and I watched it. I regret it. It was a mistake. It was a sin. I'm sorry, but I wanted to confess it to you to let you know what happened. And what happened from that freedom to share it and to talk about it, it actually created a movement in the church of other people saying, look, I struggled too. And they began to deal with it individually, like you said, and got their life right with Christ, rather than on the individual basis of, oh, I got my hand caught in the cookie jar, and now I need to make things right so I can get back with my spouse. But rather, there was a moment of vulnerability and honesty that created a pathway to hope and freedom.
You're listening to Back to the Bible. We trust that today's message has helped you move forward in faith. Be sure to come back tomorrow for more of Pastor Nat's series, Character Over Compromise. Now, let me remind you to call and request your copy of Win the Day. This month's issue is our gift to thank you for your financial support of this program. Win the Day will help you discover how to grow spiritually and live a life of purpose on purpose. So request your copy today at 1-800-759-2425, 1-800-759-2425, or visit us at backtothebible.org.
This is Pastor Nat. Thank you for listening, and before we go, let me encourage you to stand firm, stand faithful, and stand on God's Word. We'll talk more tomorrow.
Interact with Pastor Nat online at backtothebible.org, where you'll also find a wide variety of Christ-centered study resources.